He walked to the front of the court, mounted the stairs to the bench, walked around the back of the judge to the two large hinged curtains. By ancient tradition, this signalled that a death sentence was about to be handed down. This quaint practice symbolically isolated the judge from all distractions and influences, and focused his attention on the prisoner directly in front of him, so as to assist him in discharging the distasteful task at hand. Welcome to Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Hey, how are you? Are you well? Are you good? I am. Alright, this week's story, a mind bender, is the best way to describe it. It's a story that contains almost everything that a true crime story should have. Okay, I'm going to do a couple of quick shout outs and then we'll get on. So, Greg Parker Needham. Hello Greg, thank you for the photo of your rescue dog, it was lovely, thanks for getting in touch. Megan Larson, hello Megan. And Christina, who goes by Horror Queen 79 on Instagram, thank you Christina. Alright, at the centre of this story is an utterly fascinating human being with, I think, a story that is completely unique. And to this day is still being discussed and dissected. This really is extraordinary. Are you ready? Okay, let's go. Eugenia Fellini was born near Florence in Italy in 1875. Now, the life of Eugenia, it would become a life like no other. And this is in part what we're going to learn about the time period that Eugenia was born in. But we're also going to learn about what Eugenia understood from a very young age. Now, although born in Italy, Eugenia's parents decided that they wanted to move to New Zealand because they believed that there would be better opportunities for jobs. There would be better chances for the family. Probably made sense. I mean, I know years ago families were larger and people just had more kids than they have now. And this seems insane. Eugenia was one of 22 children that our parents gave birth to. Whoa, 22 kids. My God, what are they, the Waltons? My God, it's insane. So yeah, a move to New Zealand was probably a really good option if there was more work and more money to raise 22 kids. Eugenia's father worked with horses and occasionally, sometimes as a fisherman. He would just pick up odd jobs wherever he could. He was described as a really strict man, not afraid to hand out discipline when his kids needed it. Well, I suppose if you've got 22 of them, you would kind of maybe need to run it a bit like an army camp, wouldn't you? Oh. So now the family, they settle in Wellington in New Zealand in 1877. So, Eugenia. Eugenia begins to grow up and at a young age begins to take on some jobs to help bring money into the really large household. At age 5, maybe 6, Eugenia was beginning to discover something about herself. Now, it's something that we have a name for in 2018, but back then it neither had a name or a very welcome place in the world. Eugenia chose to dress in boys' clothing rather than in girls' clothing. And although born a female, Eugenia would dress as a boy from age 6 onwards. And her family, they did not like or enjoy this behaviour one little bit. Her very, very strict father and her, they would argue about this all the time. But Eugenia, even, at a very young age, stood her ground and said, no, I am wearing what I want to wear. Okay, so fine. So as Eugenia grows into a teenager, it is now a full-on commitment to male clothing. Now, as a result of dressing as a male, more job opportunities come along because employers are seeing a young male and they're thinking, okay, so bricklaying jobs, farm duties, looking after horses, jobs that were considered to be male jobs. Eugenia is taking all of these jobs on. But it gets to a point where Eugenia has just had enough of the family disagreements about the choice of clothing and decides, do you know what, I'm out of here. So leaves the family and goes to find work somewhere else. This is pretty sad, but the family don't really put up any kind of protest. Eugenia leaving, fine. They can't wrap their head around the choice to dress as a man. So they think, okay, well, be on your way then. On you go. Now, I suppose this is probably a good time to pause and say, for Eugenia, this wasn't a choice. Being transgender isn't a choice. And Eugenia felt very strongly that although born female, deep down, she was meant to be male. And so this is what Eugenia does next. Starts a brand new life, takes a job on a ship under the new name of Harry Crawford. So from here on in, I'm going to be referring to Eugenia as Harry, as that's the way that Eugenia wanted the world to see her. She wanted to be seen as Harry. And I think it stops us getting into those weird worlds of, not weird worlds, but those complicated worlds of he's, she's, personal pronouns, all of those things. So we'll go with Harry, okay? Because that's what Eugenia wanted. Now, some of those might rear their head later on as the story gets crazier and becomes more insane. But for now, we'll go with Harry. So Harry takes a job on a ship and manages to maintain the male identity without any issues. Well, it must have been quite hard on a ship, on an all-male ship. But Harry manages it. Over the course of a good few years, Harry moves from ship to ship, taking different job here and there. And I think this must have been a really happy time for Harry. He was living the life that he was desiring, the life of a male, working in a male environment, and without any family there to bother him about what they considered choices. Now, at age 23, a few years into life at sea, Harry is about to make a mistake which will cost him dearly for the rest of his life. On board one of the ships that Harry is working on, there's the usual drunkenness of sailors on board the ship Harry is working on. And one evening, during this drunkenness, Harry breaks away and he gets into conversation with the ship's captain. It's during this conversation that, under the influence of alcohol, Harry tells the captain that he'd actually been born female and his name was Eugenia. Right, how do you think the captain of a ship in 1898 takes this information? Well, not very well is the answer. In those days, it was deemed very, very bad luck to have a female on board any ship. Ships had some weird superstitions. Ships, I think, must be one of the most superstitious places in the world. Before continuing Harry's story, I have to tell you, I did some research on this. I have to tell you 5 ridiculous superstitions that take place on ships. Consider this to be a moment of light relief because Harry's story is about to take a very dark turn. Okay, so number 1 on the superstition list, there can be no whistling on board a ship. Whistling or singing into the wind was forbidden as it could whistle up a storm. There you go. Number 2. No redheads. Like flat-footed people, redheads were believed to bring bad luck to a ship. And get this, if you met one before boarding, the only way to get rid of the bad luck was to speak to them before they could speak to you. It's just all too complicated. What are you talking about? Number 3, hats. Losing a hat overboard was an omen that the trip would be a long one. Okay. Number 4, bananas. There were to be no bananas on board a ship. They were believed to be so unlucky because they would cause a ship to be lost, or that no fish would be caught. One sailor in the UK was asked to throw, quite recently, was asked to throw away some of his underwear when a fellow sailor realised that his boxer shorts had a banana print on them. That's how seriously they take bananas on board a ship. And lastly, number 5, personal grooming. Anyone who trimmed their nails, cut their hair, or shaved their beard brought bad luck to that ship. Now, I mean, those are a bit silly, but not to sailors, they're not. And for sailors, actually, the female superstition was serious, was very, very serious. Women were considered very bad luck on board a ship because they would distract the crew, which would anger the sea and it would cause really bad conditions. However, conveniently for the male crew, naked women would calm the sea, which is why so many, I thought this was interesting, which is why so many of those figureheads that you see on ships were women with bare breasts. I mean, there's something that sounds a bit dodgy there straight away. Women are such a sign of bad luck, but you know what? I mean, if they've got their boobs out, it's totally fine. I mean, that's totally calming us down. Yeah, right, guys. Yeah, sure, whatever. Anyway, back to Harry. Harry has made the big mistake of disclosing his sex at birth to the ship's captain, who responds by doing this: raping Harry. Horrific. Just horrible. The ship's captain lets all the other sailors know there is a woman on board, and the ship turns incredibly hostile towards Harry. And at the next stop, Harry is kicked off the ship, completely alone, but also pregnant from that rape. I just keep thinking what a terrible, horrible time Harry's having here. That time must have just felt so, I don't know, confusing, lonely. Okay, so Harry's now alone, pregnant, and been thrown off a ship somewhere in Australia. So Harry continues to work a series of jobs as a male, and from job to job earns a little bit of money here, there, everywhere, and makes enough money to travel and get to Sydney. By the time the 9-month period is up, Harry is ready to give birth. That sentence sounds very odd, but you know what I mean. And as soon as the birth happens, that child is taken away and given into the care of a widow who will raise that child. Harry had given birth to a girl who he names Josephine. There's very little information about this, in fact zero, but I'd like to have seen what the hospital staff thought when Harry walked in 9 months pregnant. Yeah, odd. Harry convinces the widow to take the baby and explains the circumstances that have led up to being here, and talked about the rape on the ship and about being pregnant. The widow, although she is a little scared by the woman dressing as a man, she agrees. Harry would see his young daughter only now and then, coming to visit occasionally but not regularly, and eventually all communication was lost. So now it's nearing the year 1900. Harry has left the child behind to be raised by someone else and sets out to travel around Sydney and gain some work. And that work really included things like pubs, working as a barman, meatpacking factories, and just general labouring jobs. He works for years around the Sydney area, and miles away from anyone who knows the truth, is once more living happily as a male. Now, you might have questions at this point. I did. I certainly did. I wanted to know, and forgive me if it sounds crude, but I do think it's human nature to wonder. I wanted to know if Harry was having any kind of sex with anyone, and or were there any relationships happening. And it turns out, yeah, there were. There were quite a few encounters. And then, of course, that brings about the question, how? That I will get to in a moment. Just to describe to you what Harry looked like. He wore a 3-piece suit. So long trousers, shirt, tie, waistcoat, suit jacket over it. All quite boxy, all quite big and boxy. With a hat on top. So, it's during the time when Harry's doing some casual work that he meets a man called Dr. Clark. And Dr. Clark has a big fancy house in Sydney, and he happens to be looking to employ a general male servant for different jobs. Driving, maintenance, care of the grounds, that sort of thing. So Harry takes this job on, quite happily, and it's during that time that he meets Annie Burkett. And Annie is going to play a big role in this story. Annie Burkett is also employed by the Doctor as a housekeeper. So pretty soon Harry and Annie, they're working together in the same house. They begin to talk daily and they really hit it off. Annie thinks of Harry as a really handsome man who is respectful of her, and he seems to pay her a lot of attention, and she likes that. Annie had sadly been widowed a few years before, and she was raising her teenage son on her own while working as a housekeeper. So the attention of Harry, the attention of this single man, especially someone as gentlemanly as Harry was really flattering for Annie and really exciting. Annie tells Harry that what she would actually really like to do with her life is open a confectionery shop. She'd like to sell sweets and cakes, and over the years she's saved a little bit of money. And so she now wants to invest that in her own shop. Good. So Annie leaves the housekeeping job, where she's seeing Harry every day, and off she goes to a place called Balmain in Australia. Australian listeners, please correct me if that's wrong, but I think it's Balmain. So in Balmain, Annie and her teenage son, they set up Annie's shop. And after a few months, who appears on her doorstep? Well, it's Harry. Harry's come to see if he can help Annie in any way with her new business. So the two of them, they'd previously flirted, they'd always liked each other's company. They begin to date. And after a brief, what gets described as courtship, love the term courtship, love that. Are you courting? That's what that reminds me of, like, older generations of my family would say. Are you courting? No, because it's not 1901. Anyway, after courting for a while, Annie and Harry get married. Yes, indeed, married. So this is 1913 now, and the couple are happily married, living with Annie's teenage son from her first marriage where she was widowed. So after a couple of years, Annie's confectionery business doesn't really work. It doesn't really do that well. And the couple move on to live somewhere else in a place called Des Moines. Okay, let's get to the question that so many people will be wondering about, and I know I was wondering about. How in the world is Harry keeping up the pretense of being genetically male? How in the hell are he and Annie having any kind of sex life? Well, Harry had made a dildo. Yes, a dildo. And he'd constructed a belt to which the dildo was attached. And he would wear this during sex with Annie. And she was completely unaware this wasn't a real penis. I mean, essentially, it's a strap-on, is what it is. You know, he's made this wooden penis. He's covered it in some cloth and then attached it to a belt. During sex, Harry would wear a very oversized shirt, which covered the whole top half of his body. It came down a little bit and just allowed for the dildo to poke out. Can't believe what I just said, for the dildo to poke out. But that, yeah, I mean, you know, that's the nuts and, literally the nuts and bolts of it. That really is what it is. It said that, like, him and Annie, they would have sex in the dark. And between the shirt, the dildo, and the darkness, the secret was kept. My God, the way I just said that. The shirt, the dildo, the darkness. Sounds like the title of something. The shirt, the dildo, the darkness is the new novel by Stephen King. So for 4 years, the marriage continues. But just like back when on board that ship, Harry thinks that he's getting away with it, he's hiding the truth about his birth, and something's going to happen now which will change the course of Harry's life. One day, 4 years into their marriage, Harry, Annie and Annie's son are at home and there is a knock on the door. Harry goes to answer it, and standing on the doorstep is Josephine, the child he had given birth to 15 years before. Harry is in deep shock. Well, you would be. You would be absolutely, so shocked. How had Josephine tracked Harry down? Well, the widow who had raised her had one night told Josephine the whole truth about his birth. That his mother had been raped on board a ship when they discovered that she wasn't a man. And he told Josephine that his parent was now going by the name Harry Crawford. So, here was Josephine on his doorstep, and she wanted to talk. This was the last thing Harry wanted. He wanted Josephine as far away as possible. He begged Josephine not to tell anyone the truth, not to expose the real identity and ruin his life. Josephine agrees. Okay, she won't tell Annie, but that didn't mean she wouldn't tell someone else, which she did. She told a neighbour of Annie's, who was shocked to hear it and just could not bloody wait to tell Annie the truth. So one evening, about maybe a week after Josephine's appearance on the doorstep, Annie comes home and she says to Harry, "Look, can we go for a picnic? I think we have some talking to do." Harry says, "Okay." So they go and they find a spot to have a picnic. The conversation between the two of them on that picnic is a very fraught one. Annie reveals that she knows the truth. She knows that Harry was born female, and she wants the marriage to end. Harry gets scared here of two things. Scared that Annie will go to the police, because, of course, the marriage would, in the eyes of the law, be illegal. But he's also scared that Annie's going to start telling others, and that everyone will know that Harry Crawford was actually born Eugenia Fellini. Harry returns home from that picnic alone. Where is Annie? No one knows. Well, that is except Harry, who tells people Annie has run off with another man. Now, people are suspicious. No one really believes this, but Harry insists. That's why they went on the picnic. He says because Annie wanted that picnic to tell him that she was leaving him for someone else. So Harry is stressed at this point because Annie's teenage son just doesn't believe this. He has doubts, this teenage son. He thinks, no, this is not like my mother to just get up and leave. It's just not like her. She wouldn't just go and leave me behind. So Harry decides it's time to get away from here and live somewhere else. Annie's son is placed into the care of an old aunt, and Harry leaves town. 4 weeks after Harry's left town, Annie's son decides to go to the police. I mean, of course, his mother has never shown up or made any contact, and he's still suspicious. So Annie gets reported as a missing person, and police search the area where the picnic took place, and they discover something horrific. They find the remains of a woman near the picnic spot, and the remains that they discovered are badly burned. So badly burned that an identification is impossible. The coroner said at the time, the body was much charred. No definite marks of violence were found, and the stomach contained much food. There was no smell of alcohol, and the organs of the body were in a healthy condition. Death had occurred due to burning. Ooh. So this body that they found, it couldn't be named, and the newspapers reported it as a suicide. Which I found odd. I was like, a suicide? A suicide by setting yourself on fire seems an odd ruling, but, well, that's what it was. So the body was buried, and the coffin was marked the body of an unknown woman. 2 years on from this, Harry is living in another part of Sydney, miles away from where he'd lived with Annie, and in that time had met another woman, this time a woman by the name of Lizzie. Again, very similar here to how it went with Annie, a brief courtship and a quick marriage. So Harry's now married for the second time, and once more back into the life that suits him, living as Harry, working a variety of jobs. But once more, and for the final time, the situation is about to come crashing down. Whilst working in a pub in Sydney, police arrive and they ask to speak to Harry Crawford. They want to talk about the disappearance of Annie, and they believe that Harry knows all about it. During the conversation with police, Harry's version of the picnic is told. Harry says that Annie slipped while they were in the park. She slipped and she hit her head upon a rock. He says that he tried to save her, but within minutes she was dead, and that in a panic, thinking he would be investigated and possibly it might look like he pushed her, he set fire to the body in an attempt to make the body unrecognisable. Police take Harry to the station and they ask Harry to, as is standard, remove his clothes so that they can search for weapons, sharp objects. And Harry says no. He utterly refuses to undress. And officers start to question why. Why won't you undress? We're two male officers. Why won't you undress in front of us? We need to check if you have sharp objects, any of those things. This is standard practice. And so Harry sits down and he tells police the entire story of being born Eugenia and then becoming and living as Harry. So, from here on in, right, as this story continues and it reaches its climax, I'm going to refer to Harry as Fellini. And I'll tell you why. I know I've used Harry for a while now, and that's because Eugenia felt that's who she was. She was Harry. But after the arrest for the murder of Annie, Harry asks to be placed in a female prison cell. And the dressing in male clothes, it kind of starts to come and go at points. Sometimes the male clothes are there. Sometimes it's female clothing. So, Fellini seems like the best term I can use here. Because currently this person is going between male clothing, female clothing. So the Fellini trial begins. And it's big. Now, you know what I'm not going to call it. Because you know I hate the term. But, yes, of course it's considered pretty huge. It's considered to be, massive. There is lots and lots of negative media attention for the Fellini trial. Terms include man monster. Oh, come on. The devil's child. Okay, everyone, calm down. Everyone just, take a chill pill. Chill out. Take a chill pill. Shut up. When Fellini appears in court, sometimes it's in full three-piece male suit. Sometimes it's in female clothing. But I think in court, I believe that when addressed, Fellini always answered to the name Eugenia. There's so much media coverage of this. Of course, Lizzie, the current wife, she says she just never suspected anything. And as silly as this sounds, the question that people looking back at this case happening in 1921 will ask, and it is a good question, what was Fellini really on trial for? For the murder of Annie? Or was it, as one historian puts it, for crossing the gender divide? What were people really most interested in? Well, I'll give you one guess. It was the gender part of the story, and really less the murder part of it. A newspaper article at the time said, "The accused woman is strangely interesting. She bore an extraordinary resemblance to a man, for facially she is masculine. She wore man's clothes while in the dock. Her hair is almost black and clipped short. Her face is considerably wrinkled and suggests that she is older than her stated 43 years. Now, Fellini wasn't older than that. 43 years was the right age. So the murder trial continues, and called as witnesses are Annie's son, who tells the court that his mum went on a picnic and never came back. During the trial, the buried body of an unknown woman is resumed, and the prosecution say they can prove that this is Annie's body. And it just gets messy. They try dental records. They can't really find them. They discover that Annie wore false teeth. Then it's claimed that they found some of these teeth near the body. Did they really? No one knows. And then there's a ring that people say they know that Annie wore. And then it magically appears near the picnic area site. And Fellini's defence will say this is all circumstantial at best. There's no real evidence here that Fellini killed and burned Annie. Of course, we know Fellini did tell police that's what happened. But the defence will still try to argue. A witness comes forward out of nowhere a witness for the defence, to say that on the day of the picnic, he had seen a woman, matching Annie's description, walking around like a half-wit and carrying a bottle of kerosene. He says that when he saw the newspaper articles, he just assumed that this half-wit had set herself on fire. So I'm not laughing at that, I'm just laughing at the description of actually someone coming into court and calling someone a half-wit. This, of course, it doesn't really help Fellini. It doesn't really have a brilliant defence in this case. So as I said, it just makes it more complicated that Fellini told police that he set fire to the body. But then Fellini in court says, no, I didn't say that. I told you that she slept and she fell and I tried to bring her back to life, and then not knowing what to do, I ran away. So the story's changing. Now bear in mind, this is all being played out in a court case which is largely dominated by the born female pretending to be male factor. That is the headline in this case. I mean, it's a murder trial. The bloody dildo makes an appearance in court. Why? It's a murder trial, not a dildo trial, for God's sake. So yeah, it really is more this living as a man that dominates this case. Lizzie appears in court and she says she never suspected a thing. She still calls Fellini Harry, and she says Harry was a good husband. The daughter, Josephine, she's called. She appears and she tells the court about how she went. She knocked on the door and she said that I will reveal the truth. The case eventually reaches its head, and here stands Fellini in front of the judge and the jury, who will decide if Fellini is in fact guilty of the murder. Fellini makes a statement saying, I am not responsible for the death of Annie, and my standing here accused is the result of circumstantial evidence, and there is no proof that I did this. Despite this, the jury, after 2 hours of deliberation, find Fellini guilty of the murder, and the judge lays down the death penalty. Fellini is taken to a female prison to await death. Now, the lawyer acting for Fellini was firmly of the opinion this was a wrongful conviction. This wasn't right. Fellini had been convicted because of living as Harry and not because of murder. So he campaigns and he shouts loudly. And he shouts loudly enough to get a hearing, where he argues there just wasn't enough evidence. The jury have made a mistake. Now, it works in a way. Fellini is spared the death penalty and is instead given life in prison. That's a whole other... I feel that's a whole other episode to talk about what's better, the death penalty or life in prison. Yeah. There were, and I love this, there were campaigns, there were protests in Australia. People were convinced that actually this sentence, this life sentence, it wasn't about murder. There wasn't any real big evidence. This was about living as Harry. That's what it was about. In 1931, when Fellini had been in prison for 11 years, the Australian Minister for Justice gets involved and signs a release form for Fellini, who was allowed to leave prison under the terms that now, in her 50s, Our body was weakening, and she proved to be of no real threat. So free. What will happen next? Well, another identity. Eugenia lived for the next few years as Mrs. Jean Ford, and in that time she opens a guest house. I paused here and I really wondered what that was about. The choice to live as Mrs. Jean Ford. I just wonder what that time in prison had done to the child and the adult who felt so sure they were meant to be male. Maybe the death of Annie and the revelation of Harry being a woman played out publicly, and the court trial and the time in prison. Maybe that all had its effect. So, living as Mrs. Jean Ford, 8 years after leaving prison, Fellini is crossing the busy Oxford Street in Sydney when a speeding car comes round the corner and knocks Fellini down in the road. 2 days later, Fellini dies in hospital. The irony of that death, or I don't know, maybe it's not irony, maybe there's something tragically in the hand of the fates, is that the road Fellini died on, Oxford Street, is one of now Sydney's main LGBT streets. And every year the Mardi Gras parade passes through it. This is what I find insane. There are bars and clubs and shops on that street where transgender men and women are welcomed with open arms and made to feel part of a community and supported, even celebrated for the bravery of being able to say, I was born this particular sex, but my gender is different to what I have been born into. And that's sadly something that Eugenia Fellini never felt. And so ends the story. Okay, well, what did you think of that? Ooh, as I said at the beginning, it does contain all the elements of what I would consider to be an extraordinary story. I mean, that is some life. That is a life like, I don't know anyone else who's ever lived that life. It's insane. Yeah, get in touch. Let me know your thoughts. On the social media, I'll post pictures of Eugenia as Harry. You'll find them really interesting, I think, to look at. There's one picture that I'll put up, and it's the look that I was describing earlier on. It's the 3-piece suit with a hat. It's taken just after the arrest for Annie's murder. And I just couldn't stop staring at this image. There's just something really, really fascinating in it. So yeah, I'll put those up. Have a look. Obviously, you can just search yourself. But yeah, okay. So that ends this story. Thanks for listening. If you want to get in touch, you can. Facebook, Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Join the Facebook group. It's a great place to be. Loads of activity going on at the moment. I'm loving it. It's gone insane. People are just posting all over the place, and it's ranging from people posting really heartfelt moments in their life that are getting a great response, to people posting incredibly political things that are causing debate, to people having an opinion on a documentary they might have watched, or there's just so much going on. The same is on Twitter, the same is on Instagram. I'm on those if you want to find me. Also, if you want to support the podcast, and I would love you forever if you did, I'm on Patreon. I'm not always the easiest to find on Patreon. I'm going to try and change that. But if you do want to find me, it's Extraordinary Stories Podcast. Now, annoyingly, you have to put it in as all one word. I don't know why. I've done something stupid when I've set it up. I'm going to try and change it. But if in the meantime, before I can do that, if you want to find me, you can look for Extraordinary Stories Podcast. You just have to type it in all as one word. Okay, that's really it from me for this particular episode. Okay, goodbye.
It didn't affect me really one way or the other. I would imagine from the look on his face, let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.
The Shirt, the Dildo, the Darkness is the new novel by Stephen King.
Let's get it on, let's do it, let's get it over.